Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
We'll discuss cattle traceability and its long-term value to the beef industry. We'll also explain why a national traceability system is so critical to the longevity and profitability of your farm or ranch.
And now, NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kevin Auctioner. Thanks for joining us. Although we can't anticipate every issue we'll face on our individual farms and ranches, we do know where some of our vulnerabilities exist in our industry. One concern is in the area of disease traceability. The fundamental question is whether cattle producers in all segments have the tools they need to effectively manage through an animal disease outbreak. So how do we address the topic of traceability and ensure that we're doing everything we can do to protect America's cattle herd and our own individual businesses? I'm here with a knowledgeable group of people who can shed some light on this topic. First, we have Don Schiefelbein, a former president of NCBA, who runs a seed stock operation and diversified farming business with his family in Minnesota. Next is Jacqueline Wilson. She's manager and owner of Wilson Flying Diamond Ranch and Flying Diamond Beef in Nebraska. And finally, Dr. Nancy Jackson is with us. She's a cow-calf operator who also serves as a field veterinarian for the Mississippi Board of Animal Health. Thank you so much for joining us and visiting about this important and sometimes contentious topic. I'm curious, let's just start by saying, why is animal disease traceability so important? And let's begin with you, Dr. Jackson, the veterinarian.
Animal disease traceability, if you factor in the word disease, is for absolutely critical to if we were to have a disease outbreak, it would be devastating to our economy. Certainly if we have a disease outbreak like foot and mouth disease, it affects other species too. So we think about from the social aspect, the way we produce beef, we need to be able to have consumers trust in our beef. And if we have a disease outbreak, there's a social aspect, then economic aspect is devastating from the grain industry, the effect on communities that process beef, transportation, and finally also an environmental aspect. In case of a disease outbreak, we will be disposing of the animals that have been depopulated, and that's an environmental problem as well.
Indeed. Jacqueline, what would you add?
Nancy made a lot of great points about that. And I agree, one of the biggest things as a producer, my biggest concern is the safety of my cow herd. Yeah. And if I don't have that safety, if I don't know where my animals are at all times or where they've been or where they're going, it can be detrimental in a time of a disease outbreak. And so I think the biggest picture is, when you look at the big picture, we want other producers to have that same protection too, because it can be detrimental to our industry and also the economy. Beef's a great product, but we need to make sure that we have it safe.
Don?
I don't like to sugarcoat things, and I think one of the things cattlemen need to get, and need to get it clear real well, and it comes from a lot of meetings I've been having with folks. What they have to understand when it comes to disease traceability, we kept using the word if. That's probably not the right word. It should be when. Everybody I talk to says, if you don't start managing disease traceability with the mindset it's not a matter of if, it's when, you probably aren't reading the problem right. So as cattle producers, that's where we need to turn up our antennas and start getting our plan put in place, because if it's a when, we better get our act together.
It's happened in poultry, it's happened in pork, and it even happened with those of us as humans in COVID, right?
Exactly, and to not have a plan put in place is really foolish upon the very industry we're supposed to defend.
So talk me through the potential impact of a disease outbreak. I mean, what happens, just logically speaking, what happens when we find foot and mouth in Weld County, Colorado, or wherever?
There has been quite a few national and statewide disaster plans been put in place for foot and mouth disease preparedness. We will start with, when a positive diagnosis is made, a national shutdown of all movement of cattle. And if you think about how many cattle are on the road at any one point in time, so we'll start with a 72-hour lockdown of everywhere, stop the movement. And then diagnostics. And so the response plan, similar to, as you mentioned in poultry, has been to contain and stamp out. And that's why we have to have that traceability so we know where the animals have been, where they're going to, so that we can go in and identify that area and stomp out and dispose, depopulate the animals. We're trying to contain it, not allow it to spread.
So let's talk through maybe some of the weaknesses of our existing system. So, if I take my calves to a sale barn, they have an ear tag in them, and then they go to your feedlot in Minnesota. I mean, just talk me through, that's what a lot of folks do right now, no other form of identification. What happens in the case that we have a disease outbreak? What are the vulnerabilities of that system, Don?
Well, I think we've kind of gotten a false sense of security with our disease outbreak, the cow that stole Christmas, BSE. Okay. It was a fairly mild infection, right? You all of a sudden get a super contagious infection, it changes everything, and timing is everything. If you've ever seen a map that says how quickly disease can move through the United States with the transports of cattle, it is scary, Kevin. It's scary how quickly this goes. So the key to the system is you have to contain it now. And our current system just doesn't allow us to contain it now. We have to be able to have the means to be able to track animals instantaneously to keep those diseased animals from spreading this thing like wildfire.
So talk to me from a veterinary perspective. What happens right now when we find that animal and it doesn't have any kind of traceability? What occurs, Nancy?
So currently our issue of traceability, because Don alluded to the fact, it's not digital. We have had, ever since brucellosis eradication, we've relied on metal ear tags. Yeah. And that is the official identification of an animal, similar to like their social security number. It's unique to that animal. Well, trying to find and read that number and not transpose it wrong, and it was written on paper. So if I wanted to find out these animals that were tagged and moved, it's paper records. So that's where our problem is in paper records, we're lagging behind a long time to find out where those animals have been and where they are now. We need to move to a digital that we don't slow down the speed of commerce, capturing of data, and instantly be able to move those animals.
So Jacqueline, you're a cow-calf producer, and I'm curious. It all starts there with that animal and that calf being born on your place. What do you perceive as some of the key benefits of an industry-wide traceability system?
I think the biggest key benefit is consistency, because we have a different operation than somebody like in Mississippi or in Minnesota. And I think if we would have at least one consistent, uniform decision on traceability, I think that would really benefit the whole entire industry as a whole. Now, for us personally, we've been using electronic identification since 2011. We track every single thing from the time that animal's born to the time it leaves the operation. And to have that, it's profitable for us. I mean, it makes a difference.
So it's not just about disease traceability.
It's not just about disease traceability. I want to talk more about that a little later in the show. There's also a profit factor, figured into that. But I think at the end of the day, if we could just have a uniform consensus along where cattle are traveling and where they're going and when they're going to get there, and then be able to trace those if we need to. I mean, that would be huge.
But let's be honest, this is a sensitive topic. And as president, I know lots of people bend your ears across the country as you went to meetings. Why is this such a sensitive and sometimes contentious topic in our industry, Don?
Because oftentimes it has two words that scare the bejeebers out of everybody. Okay. And one of them's government and the other one's mandatory. You put those two words together and it just runs the shivers down your spine, right? and maybe it ought to from their past experience. So I think rather than run away from the reality of mandatory and government, we need to get proactive and say, how do we carve a path, write a rules that really make common sense? Because to me, the alternative choice we have, do we want to engage, write rules that we think make sense, or do we want to say hands off, so when a disaster occurs, it's in the hands of the government? Sure. And I think that's the choice, is real clear. And I think not to do anything is about as foolish as one looks at what happened with COVID to say, boy, how'd the government handle that disease outbreak? Right. I think we need to get engaged, and we need to get engaged now.
That's a great challenge for all of us. We have a lot more ground to cover, including a look at how traceability can actually improve your profits, as Jacqueline mentioned. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Weeds will rob me of my investments. The weeds are not palatable to cows. They will not eat them, or if they do eat them, some of them may be toxic. So there's a return on investment by allowing there to be more grass available to be grazed by the cattle.
Join the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. NCBA is the oldest and largest national cattle industry organization working to defend your interests in Washington, D.C. And there are big benefits to being a member. You'll get news you can use in the National Cattlemen, email updates in the NCBA Beef Bulletin, plus big discounts only for NCBA members. Join by calling 866-233-3872 or online at ncba.org.
It can be tough to keep up with all the issues that impact the beef cattle business. That's why NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen is dedicated to bringing you valuable news, information, and education. The goal is to give you the knowledge you need to make the best decisions for your operation. So if you're looking for in-depth coverage of the beef industry and the issues that matter to you, don't miss Cattlemen to Cattlemen, debuting every week on RFD TV and on YouTube.
Welcome back to this special edition of Cattlemen to Cattlemen as we discuss traceability and its value to the beef industry. So I've got to ask you a simple question. Is it even possible in our complex industry to create a system that truly works for all segments in the beef industry? Don?
Well, I think you have to have reality 101. My goodness, we've put a man on the moon, Kevin. So we should be able to do this, and I think we can do it. But there's a lot of obstacles that we have to face. There are some challenges with technology, and this thing called the speed of commerce is one that we have to be very careful on because we can't allow our system to slow down and become less efficient than what it is today. But certainly there's a lot of technologies out there. We're going to be able to do it. But I like to tell the world we need to have this crawl, walk, run mentality. And to do nothing is the worst thing. So we need to figure out how we're crawling towards this goal. Next thing you know, we're going to be walking toward it, and then finally we're going to be running to it. But I think the key is we need to get started.
That's great advice. Dr. Jackson, what is your experience and thought?
Traceability will work for all systems, as Don talked about, is if we crawl and walk first.
Okay.
And so in our state of Mississippi, we implemented radio frequency identification of all cattle over 18 months of age in 2019. 2013, the federal rule was the metal tags. And so we were already collecting on paper the metal tag information. So we just transitioned to using low frequency tags and readers. Now, there's the issue of developing a software program that was happy that both the veterinarians could use so they could get paid for pregnancy checks, and that could be seamlessly pulled into a database management system. So yes, it's not easy. The technology needs to work. But in our stockyards, we've been able to do that at the speed of the commerce and not slow the things down.
Jacqueline, what would you add?
I think the technology is there. I mean, there's definitely places in Nebraska that are starting to implement some of this already and have for a number of years. And when we start looking at all the different states around the U.S., I mean, there's states that are ahead of the game for sure, and in terms of RFIDs and the traceability aspect of it. So we know it's possible. We just need to get everyone on the same wavelength. And as soon as we do that, I think it'll be a success.
You mentioned something very interesting in the last segment, and that is that this can also add to the profitability of your operation. I'd be curious, how are you all using it in your operation in Nebraska to enhance the productivity or profitability of your operation?
You know, my grandfather was big on animal identification. Okay. I mean, we had 8x4 note cards that he kept track of every single thing on that animal. And it didn't matter, you know, when it was born all the way up to when it was sold and, you know, the profit centers of it and all the data collection along the way. And that's something that we've continued on to this day. But when we've gone even further than that, you know, we're using genomic, we're testing for genomics, we're doing biometrics on some of those. We've sold feedlot steers as non-fungible tokens and put them on blockchain. I mean, there's so many great programs out there that can track an animal from the minute it drops on the ground to all the way till it ends up on a consumer's plate. And that's what our consumers want.
Sure.
You know, they want to be able to track that animal back. And I feel that we've done a lot of great things in our operation, but not only from the traceability aspect, from the animal health aspect too. Because if you think about going into a large herd of animals and saying, okay, I know that one's sick, that one's sick, that one's sick, and doctor those, if those don't have some form of animal identification, how do you know when you go out there tomorrow in a big group of red Angus cattle like we have in western Nebraska, that which ones you doctored yesterday? And so just thinking about that from the profitability standpoint is also a huge benefit to the producer too.
You're a seed stock producer. I have to believe you utilize this information in your record keeping.
Oh, we absolutely do. And by the way, it works for Black Angus as well. but
Well
the reality
done.
is, yeah, it's an incredible management tool. But from my perspective, animal disease traceability is more about insurance that we can continue to do business. If you look at our family structure and how many mouths are dependent on us making sure commerce continues to occur, we got to continue to do business. And this whole idea of putting tags and doing traceability that allows us to keep doing business is crucial to me. And that's one of the major reasons I've sold it on my family, that if times get tough and we need to figure out quickly where animals went, we want to stay open for business all year long.
From a veterinary perspective, have you seen producers utilize it in ways to actually add value to animals and or to just maintain a better record-keeping system?
From the veterinary standpoint, what Don was talking about, continuity of business, from the veterinary standpoint, there's a secure beef supply, which is a biosecurity, just as Jacqueline has talked about. But as value added, so some of the EIDs that are put in the animals can also take a DNA punch at the same time, and you can market those animals as genomically enhanced for better traceability. Also value-added traceability of some of the specialized programs such as natural that are USDA third-party verified, which is what our operation does, is relying on that animal having an EID and traced back to the farmer birth.
That's outstanding. When we come back, our panel shares their thoughts on how traceability helps keep beef exports viable. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
By installing Ritchie waterers, you save water while keeping it fresh and always available to your animals. You protect the land by keeping natural water clean and soil healthy. And you conserve power because they're energy efficient. We're committed to helping you create a prosperous, sustainable, and regenerative future. Because we know, like you know, that every saved drop matters. Ritchie, fresh water for life.
Cattle producers across the country work hard to care for their animals and their land. The USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service is there to help. Find out how you can work with NRCS to develop a conservation plan for your operation. Find possible funding resources for implementing conservation practices, or get free expert advice on ways to improve your farm or ranch. Visit the website nrcs.usda.gov today.
Are you concerned about the impact government policies could have on your cattle business? One way to make your voice heard in Washington is by joining NCBA. When you join, you'll be part of the nation's oldest and largest national cattle industry organization that has a professional team working in Washington, D.C. on issues that matter to cattle-producing families nationwide. Don't stay on the sidelines. Make your voice heard by joining NCBA today at the website ncba.org.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion on traceability and why it's important to the beef cattle industry. So let's talk marketing for just a minute. Does a lack of a traceability system limit us in terms of export markets, Jacqueline?
I believe that it does. And the reason being is because the U.S. market, especially the beef market, is getting more and more exposure overseas. And people want U.S. products. But, there's still a lot of concerns overseas about maybe what U.S. product is. And so being able to, have that traceability back to that producer, to that farm, to that ranch, and say specifically, okay, we know for a fact these animals may have been raised on pasture. They may not have had any growth promotants. They might be antibiotic free, and be able to market that overseas is huge. I mean, our export market is the only market that we don't have a ceiling on. There's how many gazillion people in the world, and trying to convince them that our beef in the U.S. needs to be at the forefront of their plate. I mean, that's a chore, and we need to make sure that we are able to do that. And promote everything that the great industry has to offer.
And Dr. Jackson, most other countries have a traceability system for their marketing efforts, do they not?
They do. The traceability system allows access into other markets, and so they have to be able to prove that they are free of disease. So that traceability system, just as Jacqueline talked about, back to the farm and being able to prove that animal is free of certain diseases as it's past export requirements.
Don, did we learn anything from the cow that stole Christmas in terms of what happens when our export markets shut down?
Yeah, well, it's a disaster, right? And I think cattlemen can resonate with the fact that we're still in a very competitive business. In overseas markets, a competitive business. And if all of your competitors have animal disease traceability and you don't, it just makes it more difficult to market your product. Now, that's nothing to say that U.S. beef isn't the most sought after, highest demand product there. But given a little bell and whistle with the disease traceability that many, many consumers are now almost demanding, boy, that would just put us over the top.
Great comments. And we'll be back to wrap up our show right after this. Stay with us.
You work hard to feed your herd and maintain your property. John Deere 6 Series tractors give you choices that fit your operation. 6E tractors are simple and easy to use around your ranch. See all the angles when moving snow or maneuver easily in tight spots with 6M tractors. Get more power and premium comfort with 6R tractors. Mixing feed, weighing bales, and loading goods have never been easier with new loader technologies on 6Rs. Ask your John Deere dealer to learn more.
CattleCon's headed to San Antonio, February 4th through 6th, 2025, where farmers and ranchers gather to shape our industry's future. Remember, if you ain't at the table, you might just be on the menu. Check out the latest in ranching at the Texas-sized NCBA trade show. Network, learn, and grow your operation. Don't miss this chance to steer the cattle biz in San Antonio, where the Alamo spirit lives on. Visit convention.ncba.org to get registered. CattleCon 2025, where the beef industry meets.
Welcome back as we wrap up our program on animal disease traceability. As we wrap up today, I think it's important to note that it is irresponsible, or seems irresponsible, to put our head in the sand on these issues. So I'm curious, what are your final thoughts and final challenges to our viewers who may be watching the show this evening?
The first things I would say would be to get ready for this animal disease traceability is coming, is to get a premises identification number. That's a geographic location of where your operation is. So if we have a disease outbreak, a foreign animal disease outbreak, and there's a zone, we will know whether your farm is in that zone or not, because it'll make a huge difference in the ability for you to continue your business operation, move cattle in, move cattle out. So that premises ID, and that also allows you to receive the electronic ear tags as official identification to apply to your cattle as they enter interstate commerce or you use on your own farm for your value-added programs.
You bet. Jacqueline, what would you add?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Nancy's saying. That premise ID is a very important step. And I think the next step, we want to go into step-by-step process so maybe producers don't feel overwhelmed by this.
Sure.
And for us, it was doing EID tags when we did bangs vaccinations. And it was a simple process. A lot of times those EID tags were free because of grant systems with the state vet's office. And that opened us up over a decade ago to all the opportunities that EIDs have. And then, if you don't have a brucellosis vaccine, maybe something even simple like you're doing a panel tag at birth, toss an EID tag in too. That's the whole point at the end of the day is we want to go from those metal clips to that EID tag. Yeah. It's that simple. And trying to get producers to wrap their head around it, it can be a challenge, but I think it's definitely one that we're having those conversations about, we're engaged about, and we really need to look at it long term. Can it benefit the industry? And I believe it can.
And as we talked, you don't have to have an EID reader. You can still write those numbers down if you don't want to invest in an EID reader. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. That is correct. The numbers are visible on the outside of there. So there's no information stored on the EID except that number that will ding with the reader, but you can also read the numbers printed on it.
Yeah, our vet brings his EID reader out with him. And so we have no cost in it all for an EID reader. And with free tags, it worked out perfect for our operation.
Absolutely. Don, what would you add?
Well, I just think the reality 101 again. I keep coming back to reality. Animal disease traceability is coming whether we like it or not. The real question we have to decide is, do we want to help write the rules on what it looks like? And to me, that's where NCBA comes front and center. As everybody knows, our policy is voluntary. We want to do it, and we want to do it in a private database. So if you really want to have this disease traceability done in a manner that's friendly to producers, we want to hear from you. We want you to engage. We want to tell you what will work, what won't work, because our goal at NCBA isn't to make the world more complicated for you. Our job here is, how do we navigate this very difficult subject and come to a solution that works for you and is acceptable to big government?
Thank you all for your insights today. And thank you for watching. We'll see you again next week, right here on RFD TV.